Jimmy, thanks so much for talking to us. It's a pleasure to grab some of your time. Very busy man at these kind of events.
It's fun though.
It's all going on. I really enjoyed your talk as well. It was really fun, interactive. What's the name of the program you used for the thing? I remember using
Prezi.
it. Prezi.
Yeah,
That's it. I
Prezi.
just forgot it. It's interesting you talked a lot about from like the US side and how the US dollar sort of is.
Yeah, the dollar hegemony.
Yeah. Could you just talk us through that in relation to crypto and how that will sort of, how you think crypto and growing will change that?
Yeah. So the current system is like a complete artifact of World War II and so on. If you look at monetary history, the current era is the exception, not the rule. And before there was almost always hard money. Any sort of fiat money was usually very localized and inflated very quickly. The current system is sort of based on gold, as was based on Bretton Woods post-World War II. But that it was literally they designed a new world order from a bunch of unelected bureaucrats all over the world. And when Nixon cut off the gold standard in 1971, that essentially put us in an era of purely fiat money, and that's what we've been in. But the thing that I think a lot of people sort of vaguely understand but don't really have voice to, or don't really understand why, is that why is the U.S. so privileged and everything? Like why do they get to make all these decisions, and why is all the wealth flowing that way? Well, it's because of Bretton Woods. It's because of the dollar hegemony. It's the result of a lot of the foreign settlement being in the dollar, of central banks having to keep a reserve of the dollar, central banks all over the world trying to keep a peg to the dollar and so on. Because of all of the international settlement stuff. Because we're on the dollar standard, the dollar has enormous power over all sorts of stuff, and the U.S. has essentially created an economic imperialism over the rest of the world, and that has enormous consequences geopolitically and everything else. And most of the history since, pretty much since the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, it's almost entirely monetary, but we don't get taught that in schools, right? It's, okay, why did we do this? Why did we do that? And it's like, most of it is monetary. You just don't realize that it is.
Just really quickly, finally, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I mentioned in your talk as well about big business and growing off the back of debt and things like that, and how you think the crypto in particular will really help smaller businesses and innovation and smaller countries as well, like places like Latvia that can really grow and stand on their own 2 feet.
Yeah.
Are you positive about how that will kind of change the world in a sense?
Yeah, I suspect that companies are no period of history has ever had companies this big. It's just completely anomalous throughout history. And if you look at any giant company, if you ask any management consultant, you could probably cut half the people and nothing bad would happen, right? They're enormously bloated. They waste a lot of money. So why do they exist, right? And small companies have they're much more nimble. They're usually part of some smaller community that they can serve much more directly. They have all these incumbent advantages, but big companies still win. And the reason is because of the debt-fueled growth. They have access to these tiny interest loans, often negative interest loans. It's essentially propped up through government money printing in the form of the Cantillon effect, which I talked about. So when you take that away, when you take that debt-fueled growth, right? It's essentially rocket fuel for these giant companies that no one else has access to. When you take that away, well, what's going to happen to them? Well, they have to compete at a level playing field. Once you start competing at a level playing field, all of those inefficiencies that are inherent in a lot of these big companies, they come to the forefront. And okay, suddenly you don't have these advantages. Suddenly you can't build regulatory moats. Suddenly you can't, use patents to beat down people. You can't do leverage buyouts to buy up innovation or whatever. That makes an enormous difference. And I suspect that companies will just either shrink or go away. A lot of new businesses will use their natural advantages in their favor. Companies probably don't go past much larger than Dunbar's number, which is about 150 people. Because and this is like true of almost any organizations. If you study organizations in general, once they grow past about 150, bureaucracy reigns. It's just inherent in anything that grows past where not everyone can track each other. Then it's like, well, you have to have procedures and all this other stuff. There's like enormous overhead and waste that end up as a result. So it's something that I think will happen, and maybe when countries are smaller, and this also ends up applying to governments too, right? Because they're enormously wasteful just as much as big companies are. So I suspect governments will get smaller, not just in like economic expenditure, but like in physical territory. I suspect, I mean, this is one of the speculations that we put into the little Bitcoin book is, I mean, jurisdictions are going to have to start competing for productive citizens, and I suspect like if a country like Latvia started offering, incentives for people to move here and do your stuff, and like better taxes and stuff like that, people move, and it's like, oh, okay. I mean, this happens in the U.S. all the time with different states. It's like, okay, well, Alabama does not have right or has right to work laws, so like car companies start moving there. I suspect that sort of thing will happen a lot more often, and a lot more innovation, like just more human capital gets unlocked, and a lot more ingenuity gets unlocked, creativity gets unlocked, entrepreneurship gets unlocked, and you end up with a much richer civilization. Because by definition, if you're creating a good or service that is competitive in the marketplace, you're doing it faster, better, more conveniently, or in some way, you're adding to civilization, adding value to civilization. And when enough people are doing that, that's when, man, it's a much better civilization. And I think that's where we're headed ultimately.
Jimmy, amazing stuff. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to speak to you, man.